This was ours to win. We had this. We were so close. Welcome to the Extra Salt Podcast. My name is David. If you don't already, follow me on Twitter at Extra Salt Pod on Twitter. Oh, it stings so bad. It stings so bad. But let's take a look overall really quick at the whole tournament. If you look at the whole tournament, I think that Extra Salt had such a great run. Like if you would have said at the beginning they were going to get second place, that would be an incredible run and you'd be so happy with that. Fang was absolutely phenomenal. He has proven himself in the upper echelons of CS. You know, there wasn't any super top tier teams in this, but I think he showed that he can be the best player on a map. And his clutches and his decision making and stuff is all very mature. And he played extremely well. And I was very, very impressed with Fang in this whole series. JT also looks like a completely different player than when he was on Cloud9. This was some incredible CS by JT. His poise and his patience and his fragging, all of that has gone up. And he was hard carrying this team for this series. And I think he played absolutely amazing. And I think that Margie, OC, and Sonic also had great tournaments as well, but I think all of them struggled today in the best of 5. None of them really performed up to what they had been playing. And that's kind of where the team ended up falling apart. And while they didn't end up winning, they did beat some good opponents along the way. And I think the 15th best team in the world, which is the ranking that came out today, I think that that's very fair and that's right where they should be. And I think that they're going to continue to go up as they keep playing over in Europe. So on the one hand, they should be so proud to have gotten second because just such a great feat for them to achieve. But on the other hand, this literally could have been a 5-0. Every single map was theirs and this finals was theirs to lose, and they did. And it's tough because I know 100% if they don't play in the match in the morning, the Spring Sweet Spring match, they win this tournament. Like without a shadow of a doubt in my mind. If they don't play that match, they win this tournament. Because they just looked mentally spent. Even as soon as CT side on Dust 2, the mental lapses just continued over and over and over and snowballed since then. And you could say that, you know, maybe Big was just more composed, having been in the spots more and stuff, but so many times this was not the drilled Extra Salt that we have been watching. So it's a bummer that ended up clashing like that because I think they win this tournament had they not had that. And I was hoping so bad for Celebration Podcast. The team I follow has never won a tournament since I started making any content. So I was so ready for a Celebration Podcast and not to have to talk about what went wrong, which is what I do constantly. But in the end, Extra Salt was the better team. They just couldn't get it over the line. And Big's experience just won out. And I think for the Extra Salt team, this was about as bad as you can expect them to play. And they were one swing round on 3 different maps away from winning the whole tournament. So there's a very bright future, but it stings so badly knowing that they were right there and just their mistakes and their lapses and just probably mental tiredness and waking up early, just all the things that like went into the whole day probably changed the outcome of this. But I think there is also a lot to be proud of. I know they're not happy, just like everyone who was rooting for them is bummed. You could see on their faces at the cam, they're extremely bummed. But they have a lot more CS to play in Europe. They have some bigger tournaments too. So hopefully they can move on from this and say, hey, you know what? We got second. Now let's look at all this tape and we can learn from all that. So now let's get into the sad parts and talk about the match. So first, Dust 2. Not expecting to win Dust 2, especially the way they had played the last couple times. But one thing they changed, and I said this last podcast when they were playing Dust 2, is they were never fighting for long. And you could see in this match, every T round they fought for long. They were either going long, or they were feigning utility long, or they had a lurker long. Every single round. So they always had someone controlling that area and forcing Big to have to think about it or have players there. And you could see Big's whole CT plan for the entire match start on round 2 when they immediately left B and started pushing CT once Extra Salt started taking other areas of the map like long, and they ended up going B and taking that round. So you could see how Big was going to play CT in all 4 maps right there in round 2. And so one thing about the T side that was different in Dust 2 is, like I said, we always had a lurker, or at least someone watching their back. So if we're going long, there was a lurker B, or there was a lurker mid, or something like that. So if Big pushed any areas of the map where Extra Salt was not, then Extra Salt had a player to punish that. And that was something that I'll talk about in the future maps that went away and was hugely punished. But every time Big was over-rotating or whatever, Extra Salt always had lurkers there to punish that, to be able to quickly move to other areas of the map or to get a kill as Big would push. So, like on round 10, by Extra Salt having players on both sides of the map completely wins that round. Now, round 20, up until round 20, Extra Salt played fantastic CS. It was very clean, very good. It looked exactly like Extra Salt. But then round 20, that's when the whole match shifted. Because in round 20, they have a 5v3, and all they have to do is literally back up, and the map is won. Like, the map is just over if they just back up and win the 5v3. But instead, they keep pushing mid, and it gives them 2 more kills, and then they end up losing all of B as well. So they lose that round by getting more aggressive and not backing up and kind of playing better CS. And then round 23, they have it won again. They have the bomb long. It's a 2v1. Ends up giving up 2 1v1s that Xantares wins. And then kind of continues on from there. And so then even round 30, Sonic ends up just jumping through double doors with his knife out. He's coming down on a flank. He sees players through the mid doors and then just jumps through double doors with his knife out and immediately dies. So luckily JT was there to save the day from window with an incredible play. He had so many of these good plays. But it was just stuff like that where the decision making that they needed to make became very poor. And especially for Sonic had a pretty rough day with this. And that was kind of one of the examples of, if he just keeps his gun out, if he doesn't go through double doors, if he just stays alive, anything is better than what he did of jumping through with his knife out. They're going to hear that. They're going to turn, and he has no chance at winning that fight at all. And then on Train, we played very much like I talked about in the Team Spirit podcast. Played very slow, very methodical. It wasn't until round 12 that Extra Salt did the fast A exec that they're completely known for, which is their whole bread and butter. They're known for fast getting out sandwich and onto the trains and then execing onto the site, and then that kind of opens up the whole map. Because once they have to worry about players constantly pushing in early, now you can start doing stuff like slow going long or going B or things like that. But they took so long to go to their default. I don't know if they were kind of just playing scared or playing not to lose, or if they had a different read or things like that, but they didn't really do their bread and butter, and they just played way too slow. But even still, they could have had an extremely good half, but they would do stuff like in round 14, they're versus pistols, but they keep playing in these untradeable angles. So the pistols go up, get a kill. There's no one else around, so then they get a gun, they can fall back. Same thing, re-aggress, get a kill, get a gun, fall back. Stuff like that. And then round 15 was kind of the first round that OC had like a real impact with his op. But then he ends up going sandwich with the bomb all alone in a 2v1, ends up dying there. Now the bomb is in sandwich. They end up losing that round as well. when he could have just taken the bomb with a teammate, planted, gone B together, kind of done anything that they wanted together. Instead, they split up, go to different areas. He loses the gun battle, and then they end up losing that round. And then there was round 22, which was a perfect example of the teamwork issues we saw all day, which was they were in a 4v2, and then Big walks out Ivy. No one's looking Ivy, and so Sonic dies. And then Marky decides he's going to swing out and try and take a duel, but it was too late. It wasn't immediately after the trade. It was a couple seconds later. There's no one to cover him, so he swings out to try and take a duel, loses it. Now it's a 2-on-2, and OC's the only one on the site, so he's having to worry about that area. He doesn't know 100% if there's two people there, so he's kind of looking elsewhere. He ends up dying without even looking at the player. So there was no communication on who was watching what because Ivy was left open for them to just walk out and get a kill. And then there was no teamwork once the first mistake was made. Because once they made the first mistake, they could have waited and done a crossfire with OC and Marky, knowing that someone is coming from that area. But instead, they swing out to try and take another duel and end up losing. And that was kind of something that we saw across all the maps, was just swinging to take these duels, assuming you're better and you're going to get the kill, and you end up not, and it ends up costing you. So then there was also round 26 where Fang is solo on B and he's playing upper behind the boxes, and that's kind of a one and done spot where if you're soloing B, that's not really what you want to do. If you're upper and you're soloing B and they kill you and they know that you're the B player, they then have the whole site, which they did. But then Extra Salt actually had really good rotates to collapse on him, and Sonic gets a kill, but then pushes too far too fast, so he ends up trying to push, and then the Opper kills him before Extra Salt could get into the back of the site. So if he just does nothing, if he never peeks, if he never moves, doesn't do anything, they then have to be worrying about back there the entire time. And that forces them to be turning around, looking, using utility back. Instead, the second they kill him, it's now a 2-on-3 instead of a 2-on-4. And then they can use their utility forward, and they end up winning that round as well. So there's just so many rounds that a team as drilled as Extra Salt doesn't usually have these kind of issues. They're usually very smart and cerebral, and they know when they have advantages. They know how to trade across with each other, all that kind of stuff. And then on Vertigo, they had really good utility usage on CT. And JT and Fang, again, played very well. JT had so many more kills than he should have gotten when he was playing close ramp. He was just holding that site down so well. But then round 16, they get to the T side. And the whole T side was very uninspired. They had no way to get up ramp. They never had a lurk whenever they were going to a different site. And they just couldn't make their way up ramp. They weren't doing like a top ramp smoke, or they weren't doing the smoke from spawn that smokes off short at the beginning, and they weren't doing any of that kind of stuff. And they ended up just spending so much time in lower ramp, just getting hit by nades and mollies, and 4 or 5 of them just standing there with nothing going on the other side of the map. So I'm not really sure why they didn't do more adjusting, or once they were realizing that Big was stacking the site every time they were going somewhere, and they were pushing behind them, doing all these things, all they had to do was just have a couple rounds with a lurk on the other site they were going to, either feigning utility or just waiting to see if they push. And then the whole T side opens up, because once they push once or twice, or once they stack and that lurker is able to get into the site and realize that it's not stacked, they can't do that anymore. But Big was just doing that every single round, and it was never punished, because Extra Salt would just go to a site with all their players. They'd use their utility, they'd wait, and then use a little more utility, and then wait, and then use a little bit more, and then try to exec. And by that time, Big has at least 4 players on every single site. They know exactly what's going on. Extra Salt can't go back because they've had none of that map control ever. And so they just needed to have one player just over there for a little bit, just giving a little bit of presence, punishing them when they push, kind of just doing anything. And the couple of times that they went B, they tried to do this on A, but they would throw a smoke that would miss or whatever, and then the Opper would be looking down A ramp saying, there's no one here. So they would try and throw a flash A ramp and then go B. They would throw the flash. The Opper would be like, there's still no one here. And then when they're going B, instead of going fast after that flash, they would wait for the rotate over, they would try a boost, and it would take another 25, 30 seconds. And so by that time, Big is like, okay, we're just going to go stack. They're obviously not going to now be dry walking up ramp at the end of the round. So they just needed to have more presence overall. They needed to just have a lurker anywhere or any round, and they easily could have taken that T side, which is very uninspired. They were stuck at the bottom of ramp at the beginning of almost every single round. And that was just a huge bummer. The fact they got so close to winning is pretty crazy. It took a bunch of ecos from them to do it. But if they would have just played faster like they do on ecos, or like I said, have the lurk, that whole T side could have been completely different. And then on overpass, the way Big played CT on Vertigo transferred over exactly to how they played CT on overpass. It was almost identical. Because again, Extra Salt had no lurkers or anyone watching their back, and Big would just push mid, push long, push B, and Extra Salt never had any idea. They even would push up mid, or not mid. What's the middle area called? Connector. Jeez. And so they would even push up connector and up the back into CT spawn, and Extra Salt just never had anyone watching the other sides. And they could have done this, and again, if they do this a couple times and they punish Big doing this, then the whole map changes. So if they come out monster and Extra Salt has a player sitting back at the fence, like kind of how Floppy did for Cloud9, then they get that kill and they know that B is weak, and then the other team has to rotate to B, and now they can exec on A, or they can choose to fast exec on B. And it just changes everything, and they just got completely run over on their T side, which is very abnormal. And I think a big part of this too, especially for overpass, was Big got to watch Extra Salt play in overpass and a train that morning. And I know that they were getting stuff from that match as well. So not only was Cloud9 tired, or not only was Extra Salt tired, but they were also literally being counter-stratted that morning. And so that's got to be so tough, especially because they had they played overpass this tournament? I don't think they had. So it was going to be something where they could have had new stuff, but they just weren't able to do it, and Big CT just completely ran them over. But then on their CT side, they ended up bringing it back, and this became a totally winnable map on their CT side, but they still had these mental lapses or just thinking that, you know what, we're better, I'm going to win these fights, and they wouldn't. So like on round 17, OC has a scout and he's on A site, and he just is wide dry peeking down mid and gets scouted. So now Fang, who's over in bathrooms, thinks, okay, well, OC got scouted, he can no longer peek, maybe I'll try and peek out and get the kill. He peeks out and he gets scouted. And now they've just lost an anti-eco because they just did 2 dry peeks, assuming that they were just going to be able to get the kill instead of playing off each other or using a flash or their utility or trying to get a better angle, stuff like that. And then just some other stuff like round 21, Fang gets, 3 awesome kills and up at party, and then he just needs to fall back, but instead keeps trying to go, dies. Then OC decides he's going to try and go, and he ends up dying. And so just kind of destroys their economy when, again, if they just back up, it's a 5v2. It becomes a very easy round. And round 22, they should know it's versus an eco, but Fang starts to push up all alone, and he only gets 1 kill long and dies. Now they have an M4, and then they're able to push up and in. So there's just a lot of stuff like that where if they were just playing with any sort of trade potential or any sort of backup or utility or whatever, they could have turned so many of these rounds, because they lost so many just based on 1v1 peaks or unflashed peaks, or just thinking like, we're just better, we're used to being able to get all these kills, and when they wouldn't, they would get totally punished for it. So you could see kind of the same thing like round 27, Fang in connector. He has a great presence. He's behind them in connector, but the squeaky door is closed. So what he needs to do there is he knows that he has good control, But if he opens that squeaky door, he's at a disadvantage because players can be anywhere water and they know exactly where he is. So when he's in that position, they need to take a second, and Marky either needs to grenade the door open so that way they don't know Fang is there, or Fang needs to wait to open the door until they're execing on B so that way he can come in behind them as they're distracted. He opens the door while they're just sitting in water, doesn't know where anyone is, tries to hit a headshot and dies. Then that opens up that whole pathway for them to go back towards A. So just so many things like that we didn't see a lot of for the whole tournament. We just saw them very poised, very smart, and so they just lost a number of rounds, or they would lose a number of players to ecos because they weren't just playing off of each other or respecting the fact that they're able to get these kills as well. So they also just made a lot of positioning mistakes, especially Sonic. He made a lot of positioning mistakes or would kind of die with a knife out or utility or whatever. It felt like Marky's aim was kind of off. And then OC struggled to have impact with his op really. And he took a lot of like confident angles and would lose his battles. So it was just kind of a lot of, I would say it was 3 off days for Sonic, Marky, and OC. And maybe that was because it was the finals. I think it was because they played that match in the morning. But it could have been that they're also just used to playing in NA and had like a little too much hubris. Like, oh, I can peek this angle. I'm the best opera in NA. But then you're versus a team like Big and that can get punished. Who knows? I think it was just being mentally tired at this point. And by the end of the match, it felt like JT was the only player who had any sort of composure left. That was the best series of his career, and I think he was hard carrying the team, and his decision making up until the very end was great. The way he'd peak angles, the patience that he would play with, his fragging was just great on every map, all series. But like I said, on the T sides of Overpass and Vertigo, I do think that the calling needed some switch ups, because I think that the train T side calling could have been a little bit better, despite the fact they almost had like a sick T-side round. So maybe T-side train couldn't have been better because some of their losses were just, again, teamwork mistakes, not calling mistakes. But Overpass and Vertigo, the T-sides, both definitely needed to adjust to what was happening, and neither of them did. And then Fang also played extremely well. And if you look at the future and you say, okay, this is what I have in Fang, and this is what JT is going to give me every match, then that's an extremely bright future. Like if JT and Fang can bring that, and then OC, Sonic, and Marky all don't end up having a bad day on the exact same day, which happens to also be the finals, if they're all playing up as well, this team can be really good. But you definitely have to be impressed with the whole team. I think they did a great job for the whole tournament. It is just such a sour note to end on, but they played well. And I hope that they can look at that and realize that, you know what, this is just one tournament in a long, long line of tournaments they're going to play in. So there's a lot to be proud of, and a lot of great matches coming up. DreamHack has a number of top teams. That's going to be really, really fun. So they're doing Spring Sweet Spring, which doesn't have a lot of top teams, but getting good experience against these teams is always good. These tournaments are always just upset central. There's a lot of really good, tier 2 teams in Europe, so that'll be great practice. DreamHack is going to be amazing. Then depending on how far they go in DreamHack, that's going to like bleed into ESEA Premier. I'm not really sure how that's going to work. So I'm assuming they're going to do Spring Sweet Spring, DreamHack, fly back to NA for ESEA Premier, and depending on how well they do in DreamHack, they might be forfeiting matches and then try and just win out. But I'm not sure how long ESEA Premier goes, because it might bleed into IEM. But also when they fly back to NA for ESEA Premier, they're going to play in the CS Summit 8, which is the RMR tournament. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all ends up stacking up. Then they're going to fly back for IEM Summer for June 3rd. So they're definitely going to have some travel coming up. but they're also going to have a lot of good matches. Spring Sweet Spring, in the meantime, like I said, going to be some good matches. DreamHack hopefully is awesome. I want to see them just play like some awesome teams. They're starting with Astralis, which was going to be really cool, and now is like, we'll see. But then up next, they could play Complexity or Vitality. Hopefully they play Vitality. That'd be pretty sick. I just want them to play as many of the top teams as possible, because then you can at least put a measuring stick out and see where you stand. Can you beat, this Astralis? Can you beat Complexity? Can you beat Vitality? Can you beat, these other teams? They're definitely on the harder side of the bracket, but that's fun. You want to play the best teams and you want to see where you're at. You don't want to come in and end up playing big again, on the other side of the bracket. You want to be playing Astralis and Vitality. So a lot of fun coming up. Keep your head up. Fantastic tournament. Yes, that sucks. Feel that. I get that. Any competitor is going to just be gutted by that. But there's so much coming up. And in the long run, that tournament compared to others is smaller. So get up for these next tournaments and let's see what you can do against some of these real big teams. Thanks for listening. Follow me at Extra Salt Pod. I'll be making a podcast probably either at the end of Spring Sweet Spring or, depending on what happens in DreamHack Masters, probably a couple throughout DreamHack Masters if they do well. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.